Have you ever gone shopping and ended up spending way more than you actually planned? Like you went to the supermarket to buy toothpaste, but somehow walked out with a barbecue. Well, guess what? That's not a coincidence. Welcome to the world of consumer psychology, where it's your brain and not your budget that decides what you buy. Today on Espresso Economics, we're looking at the tactics companies use to get you to spend more, and more importantly, how you can outsmart them. Let's start with one of the most common tactics, sales.
Now, we need to point out that the vast majority of retailers out there are honest and their sales are perfectly legitimate. And in the EU, there are strict rules to protect you from misleading sales tactics. But regulators do sometimes find cases where the so-called original price was exaggerated to make the discount look bigger. So you see a 50% off tag and suddenly you're all excited. And that's where consumer psychology kicks in.
What's happening here is something called the anchoring effect. We spoke to Kai-Markus Müller, Professor of Consumer Behavior at Furtwangen University, and he explained how the anchoring effect works.
What's happening when we see an anchor? One of the most fundamental issues in pricing is that our minds work relatively. So we don't really know what something's worth. We're searching for comparisons. We're searching for something to hold on to. And for example, if we see, let's say, a yogurt that costs €3, and then we see another yogurt that costs €1, the €1 yogurt suddenly appears cheap.
But here's where things get really sneaky. Some multiple pricing tactics actually work together to trick you. First, there's something called the decoy effect, and you can see it in cinemas, for example, where they offer small, medium, and large popcorn. And the medium one is only slightly cheaper than the large one. And that's because the medium one isn't actually meant to be bought. It's only there to make the large one seem like incredible value. Then there's something called charm pricing. That's when prices end in 9 or 99, and your brain reads 19.99 as being closer to 19, even though it's basically €20, isn't it? And here's my personal favorite, bundling psychology. That's when companies sell several products together. And this works because we as humans are really bad at valuing individual items. But when they're bundled, we focus on the overall deal instead of questioning the price of each product, which we might actually be able to get cheaper individually elsewhere. So how do you beat the system? Well, first of all, by becoming more aware of how your brain works. One of the keys is to recognize the difference between two distinct modes of thinking, called System 1 and System 2. They were first described by Nobel Prize-winning economist and psychologist Daniel Kahneman in his book Thinking Fast and Slow. A good example of System 1 thinking would be when you're driving along your usual route home, and you barely think about it. Your brain just switches to autopilot and you know when to turn. But if you're driving in a new city, you need to check the map and watch out for road signs and make decisions step by step. And that's System 2 thinking at work. And when it comes to saving money, the advice is clear.
If you are on a budget, if you want to save money, you should never buy things on System 1.
So we've talked about prices. Now let's talk about design. Have you ever noticed that most supermarkets don't have windows? Well, there's a very specific reason why they don't want you to see the outside world. Supermarkets are designed using what's called environmental psychology, and that's the science concerned with how physical spaces influence behavior. Just as casinos have no clocks or windows to make you lose track of time, supermarkets use similar tactics. Let's start with the entrance. So you walk in, and what you're walking through is fresh produce, because fruit and vegetables create this health halo effect. So your brain associates the entire shopping trip with healthy choices, making you feel better about buying that ice cream later. Now let's look at the layout. Essentials like milk, bread and eggs are strategically placed at the back and in opposite corners. And this forces you to walk the entire floor to get to them, what retailers call the golden path. Supermarkets are designed for the so-called Grün effect, named after the Austrian architect Victor Grün. And this is when you lose track of time and your original shopping intentions because you're just so overwhelmed by choices and stimuli. And then there's the checkout area, and this is the supermarket's last chance to get you to buy something. So it's designed to create a bottleneck where you're made to wait, surrounded by all the potential impulse purchases. The chocolate, magazines and small gadgets are all carefully selected based on purchase data. But how can you outsmart this shopping environment? Well, here's Professor Müller again.
One way to deal with all these tricks and one way to handle all the tricks is, for example, take a shopping list with you and make sure you stick to the shopping list.
Other tips include using a shopping basket instead of a trolley if you're intending to buy fewer than 10 items, because the smaller container naturally limits your purchases. And never shop when you're hungry, stressed, or in a hurry, because these emotional states make you more susceptible to environmental influences. That's system 1 decision-making again. But if you think things are bad in the offline world, wait until you see the sales tricks used online. Because digital manipulation takes everything you've just heard and supercharges it. The online world is full of what are known as digital dark patterns. These are basically tricks used by websites to get you to do things you didn't intend to do.
Now, the EU has rules to prevent misleading or manipulative design, including the Digital Services Act, which covers online platforms. But regulators still warn that some companies push the boundaries, so it's important to stay alert.
Here is Professor Müller on where he has seen one of these dark patterns at work.
A good example where I've seen this many times is in travel. You try to book a flight, you go through many steps, you finally got your takeoff, your landing, and you got the website with the best deal. And then at the final step, suddenly you've typed in all your credit card details. There's a humongous extra fee, right? The actual feeling says, now I really just want to go to the competitor and buy it there, right? But you've invested so much, which is consumer psychologists call this the sunk cost effect. You have already invested so much in this one website that in the end you buy it despite the extra fees.
And then there's something called digital urgency. An example may be a countdown timer that magically resets when it hits 0, or a message saying, only 3 left in stock, that never seems to change. And this is how it works.
Digital scarcity is a classic way of tricking you into an emotional response, a system 1 thinking. It gives the impression that only a very few items are left over. For example, especially in capacity, anything where you sell, for example, you buy tickets, that's a very typical instance where the ticket might actually be gone, right? Or the hotel room might be gone, the flight seat might be gone. And so when they say there's only 2 seats left, then you gotta think like, oh, do I buy now or not? And when you buy, you may have already purchased something at a way too high price. One way to get over this, or one way to deal with such a trick, is just always to sleep over it.
Now here's something really sneaky. Retargeting ads. You look at a product once and suddenly it follows you around the internet for weeks. And this isn't a coincidence, it's all by design.
Social proof manipulation is another thing to watch out for, although this is less of a problem in Europe thanks to EU laws against it. But some of those 4.8-star reviews might still include fake reviews or incentivized reviews or even reviews for a completely different product.
Another disconcerting thing is data harvesting for psychological profiling. Every time you browse, hesitate, or abandon a cart, companies are building a psychological profile of you. So they know when you're most likely to buy an impulse, what emotional triggers work on you, and how to time their offers for maximum impact. So how can you navigate this digital manipulation maze? Well, first, use ad blockers and privacy-focused browsers to limit tracking and retargeting. Always review your entire cart before checkout and uncheck anything that you didn't explicitly add. Also, be skeptical of urgency. If something is truly limited, it will sell out, but if the timer keeps resetting, it's manipulation. Read reviews critically. Look for specific details, check reviewer profiles, and be wary of reviews that sound like marketing copy. But companies don't just manipulate what you buy, they also manipulate when you buy it. And the chances are they know the exact time of day you're most likely to overspend. Studies show that people make different purchasing decisions based on the time of day. And companies use this data to time their marketing for maximum psychological impact. For example, in the morning, you have high willpower, but are often rushed, and that makes you susceptible to convenience premium purchases when you knowingly pay extra for something that saves you time and effort. In the afternoon, decision fatigue sets in, and that makes you more likely to choose default options or accept add-ons. And in the evening, emotional vulnerability peaks, which makes you susceptible to comfort purchases. These are feel-good buys that soothe emotions in the short term. It's things like getting a takeaway meal or ordering cozy blankets, candles or loungewear that make you feel safe and relaxed. And late at night, impulse control is at its lowest, which is why so many shopping apps send notifications between 9 and 11 p.m. So what can you do to fight back? Well, try to plan your shopping for when you're at your most rational. If you shop in the morning, do your online shopping then, not during your more vulnerable evening hours. And try changing your environment when you make big purchases. So if you usually shop on your phone while relaxing, maybe use a computer at a desk instead to engage more analytical thinking. So there we have it. With Professor Müller's help, we've covered 4 major areas of consumer psychology manipulation: the anchoring effect, environmental design, digital dark patterns, and contextual timing. Recognizing these tricks is half the battle when it comes to not falling for them. Once you truly understand how these systems work, you become much harder to exploit. So, which of these manipulation tactics in this video did you find the most surprising? Have you noticed any of them affecting your own purchasing decisions? Share your experiences in the comments. And if you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. See you next time on Espresso Economics.